MMA math is a notoriously bad method of predicting fights. For UFC 307, I created a simple model that would use MMA math to predict the results of the main event of Alex Pereira versus Khalil Roundtree. And won't you look at that? It worked! Admittedly, not the most difficult fight for MMA math to predict, but hey, I'd be concerned if it got it wrong. So today, we're going to give the model a slightly more difficult card with UFC 308, and I'm going to be looking at both the main event and co-main event. Just to reiterate, MMA math is known to be extremely bad at predicting fights. The purpose of these videos is not to accurately predict the results of these fights, but more of an experiment where I can track how reliable MMA math is over time, and at the moment, it's swinging at 100%. So if you want to keep following how MMA math tracks over time, make sure you subscribe to the channel. With that out of the way, let's quickly recap how we can use MMA math to predict the fights on this card. A fighter will get points for every victory relative to their opponent's UFC ranking. So beating a champion will get you 16 points, beating ranked 1 will get you 15, beating ranked 2 14, and so forth. Losing a fight nets you -2 points, and getting finished yourself nets you -3. You get an extra 5 points if you beat someone who your opponent has lost to in this 5-fight stretch. If your opponent has avenged that loss, you only get 1 point. You get an extra 5 points for a KO, TKO, or submission, and an extra point for a streak of finishes correlative to the length of the streak. For example, if you had a 3-fight win and finish streak, you'll get 15 points base for these finishes and an extra 3 for the length of the streak, making it 18 points. Doctor's stoppages will be judged on a case-by-case basis. And an extra 5 points if 2 or more of the judges give you every round in a decision victory. If you are over 35, you lose 5 points, and an extra point on top of that for each year older than 35 you are. If you are undefeated in the UFC, you gain an extra 5 points. If you have a loss in the UFC but are undefeated in your last 5, you get 3 points. For the fight we are predicting, if you are fighting in your country of origin and your opponent is not from that same country, you get a cheeky, dodgy judge bonus of an extra 5 points. This does not apply to the United States and their fighters. Let's start with the co-main event and one of the more intriguing fights of the year with Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev. This is a fight where Khamzat is the clear favourite if you look at the betting lines, but also there just seems to be a general belief that Bobby Knuckles can get it done, not only because he is one of the greats of the sport, but also because we just generally like him and want him to win. But let's see what MMA math says about this fight. Starting with Khamzat Chimaev, Khamzat straight off the bat is undefeated not only in the UFC but in his whole career, giving him 5 points to start with. 5 fights ago for Khamzat takes us all the way back to the 19th of September 2020 for a UFC Fight Night headlined by Colby Covington and Tyron Woodley. Khamzat, running at peak UFC hype machine coming off his ridiculous 2 finishes in 10-day debut, was given unranked but crafty veteran Gerald Meerschaert. This fight would take place in the middleweight division. Khamzat would quickly prove that the hype was at least kinda justified by catching Meerschaert with a right cross just 17 seconds into the fight, earning him 5.5 points. 4 fights ago lands us at the 30th of October for UFC 267 Blachowicz vs Teixeira, where after a bit of an odyssey in trying to get a fight with Leon Edwards over the line, Khamzat would ultimately be placed up against 11th ranked Ji-Ling Liang in the welterweight division. Khamzat would absolutely run through the leech, putting him to sleep in just 3 minutes and 16 seconds into the fight, earning him 10 points for the victory and finish, and an extra 2 points as his finish streak will end here. 3 fights ago takes us to the 9th of April 2022 for UFC 273 Volkanovski vs the Korean Zombie, where Khamzat, now ranked 11th, would take a big step up in competition, being put up against number 2 ranked welterweight Gilbert Burns. In what would end up being one of the best fights of the year, Khamzat and Burns would put on an absolute barn burner, with Khamzat clinching a 29-28 on all judges' scorecards for a unanimous decision victory and 14 points. 2 fights ago for Khamzat takes us to the 10th of September 2022 for the co-main event of UFC 279 Diaz vs Ferguson. Originally on the card to main event against Nate Diaz, Khamzat would fail to make weight after doctors forced him to stop cutting, which led to a bit of a whole card shuffle, and Khamzat ultimately placed up against unranked Kevin Holland at a 180-pound catchweight. Again, Khamzat would steamroll through his opponent, ultimately submitting Holland 2 minutes and 13 seconds into the fight with a DAS. Khamzat would earn 5.5 points for this fight. Khamzat's last fight took place on the 21st of October 2023 for the co-main event of UFC 294 Makhachev vs Volkanovski 2, where Khamzat would take on the number 1 ranked welterweight Kamaru Usman in a middleweight fight. As you will have noticed, Khamzat jumps from the middleweight to welterweight divisions back and forth, and this has posed the question to if we'll honour the points associated with the rankings, especially if he's changing divisions. And to that point, I'm going to say yes, as long as it's within one weight class of the fight we are predicting. So this is a middleweight fight, any fight in the welterweight or light heavyweight divisions will honour that ranking. In this instance, even though Kamaru is unranked at middleweight, we'll treat him as if he was the number 1 contender as he was in the welterweight division. In any case, Khamzat would take a majority decision victory over the former champion even after tearing a ligament in his right hand during round 1. Khamzat would earn 16 points for this victory. With Khamzat out of the way, next we'll look at the former champion and one of the legends of the sport, Bobby Knuckles Robert Whittaker. 5 fights ago for Whittaker takes us to the 12th of February 2022 for the main event of UFC 271, where Whittaker would attempt to reclaim the middleweight title he lost about 2 years ago against Israel Adesanya. In what would be a relatively close fight with some fans actually giving the fight to Bobby Knuckles, Whittaker would lose by a unanimous decision, unfortunately losing 3 points. 4 fights ago takes us to the 3rd of September 2022 for the co-main event of UFC Fight Night Gane vs Tuivasa, where Whittaker would take on number 2 ranked middleweight Marvin Vettori. In a vintage Bobby Knuckles performance, Whittaker would completely shut out Marvin, earning himself 14 points and an extra 5 points as 2 judges gave Whittaker every round. 3 fights ago lands us at July 8th, 2023 for UFC 290 Volkanovski vs Rodriguez, where Whittaker would take on 5th ranked Dricus du Plessis. In Dricus's breakout performance, he would finish Whittaker with strikes. Unfortunately for Bobby Knuckles, he would lose 5 points. 2 fights ago takes us to the co-main event of UFC 298 Volkanovski vs Topuria, where Whittaker would be put up against 6th ranked Paulo Costa. Whittaker would eat a picture-perfect spinning heel kick to end round 1, but bounce back instantly in round 2 to put on a typical Bobby Knuckles performance, earning a unanimous decision victory and earning 10 points. Whittaker's last fight takes us to the 22nd of June 2024 for UFC Fight Night Whittaker vs Aliskirov, where Whittaker, even though being the number 3 ranked former champion coming off a big win, he would be put up against unranked Ikram Aliskirov. Thankfully for the hearts of every MMA fan ever, Whittaker would make light work of Ikram, finishing him just 1 minute and 49 seconds into the first round with the most Bobby Knuckles combo ever, earning him 5.5 points. So there we have it. MMA Math predicts Khamzat will win, which is aligned with the bookmakers. Again, as I mentioned in the intro, although you almost have to agree with MMA Math and the bookmakers, I personally have the feeling that Bobby Knuckles can put on a performance, and I'm sure a lot of fans would agree with me. Okay, so now let's move on to the main event, which I personally think is one of the best featherweight championship matchups in terms of styles in a very long time. Starting with the challenger and former champion Max Holloway. 5 fights ago for Max Holloway takes us to the 13th of November 2021 for UFC Fight Night Holloway vs Rodriguez, where in one of the best fights of the year, number 3 ranked Yair Rodriguez and number 1 ranked Max Holloway will put on a show for like the 60 people in the UFC Apex, leading to a unanimous decision win for Holloway in a fight that would end up much closer than fans predicted, earning 13 points for Max. 4 fights ago lands us at the 2nd of July 2022 for the co-main event of UFC 276 Adesanya vs Cannonier, where Holloway would make his 3rd attempt at Alexander Volkanovski, challenging him for the featherweight strap. Unfortunately for Holloway, Volkanovski would put a performance in on him, to the point where fans actually believed Max might be injured, just due to how strange this performance was for him. In any case, Max will lose 3 points for the loss. 3 fights ago takes us to the 15th of April 2023 for UFC Fight Night Holloway vs Allen. In a much needed bounce back fight for Holloway, he would put in a classic performance against number 4 ranked Arnold Allen. Although not an easy victory by any means, Max would return to form, showing off his trademark volume in a unanimous decision victory, earning himself 12 points. 2 fights ago for Max lands us at the 26th of August 2023 for UFC Fight Night Holloway vs the Korean Zombie. Holloway, ranked number 1 and a huge betting favourite, was simply too good for the Zombie, who entered this fight ranked 8th. Holloway would finish the Korean Zombie just 23 seconds into the 3rd round with a counter right hook, ultimately retiring the Korean Zombie and earning 13 points. Holloway's last fight takes us to the 13th of April 2024 for UFC 300, where Max would move up a weight class and take on number 2 ranked lightweight Justin Gaethje. In what would be the highlight of the monumental card, Holloway as a slight underdog will put a beating on Gaethje, ultimately finishing him with one of the greatest knockouts of all time with 1 second left in the fight, giving him 19 points for the fight and an extra 2 points for the 2-fight finish streak he takes into the fight. Now, let's look at the champion Ilia Topuria, who is undefeated not only in the UFC, but in his whole MMA career, starting him off with 5 points. 5 fights ago takes us to the 10th of July 2021 for UFC 264 Poirier vs McGregor 3, where in his 3rd UFC fight, Ilia would be put up against unranked jiu-jitsu ace Ryan Hall. After avoiding the danger of Hall's grappling, Ilia would counter a spinning heel kick and finish Hall with ground strikes, gaining him 5.5 points. 4 fights ago takes us to the 19th of March 2022 for UFC Fight Night Volkov vs Aspinall, where Ilia would be put up against former Cage Warriors champion Jai Herbert. The fight didn't start particularly well for the champ, eating a flush head kick less than a minute into the fight. Ilia would recover well, showing off his grappling, and would come back early in the 2nd round to hit one of the most beautiful right hooks you'll ever see. That's another 5.5 points for Ilia. 3 fights ago for Ilia takes us to the 10th of December 2022 for UFC 282 Blachowicz vs Ankalaev, where the now 14th ranked Ilia would take on the 9th ranked Bryce Mitchell. In a fight that was expected to really test Ilia, El Matador would pass in flying colours, finishing Mitchell in the 2nd with an arm triangle, netting him 12 points for the victory and an extra 3 points, as this is where his finish streak would end. 2 fights ago for Ilia takes us to the 24th of June 2023 for the main event of UFC on ABC 5, where Ilia would take on 5th ranked Josh Emmett. For me, this is Ilia's breakthrough performance, solidifying his status as a potential future champion. In the fight, Ilia would batter Emmett for the full 5 rounds, even earning a rare 10-7 round in the process, and winning all rounds on 2 judges' scorecards, earning him an extra 5 points on top of his 11-point base. Ilia's last fight takes us to the 17th of February 2024 for the main event of UFC 298, where Ilia would challenge for the title against champion Alexander Volkanovski. Coming in as an underdog, Ilia would prove all doubters wrong, leveraging his high-pressure boxing to catch Volkanovski with a right hook and finishing him 3 minutes and 32 seconds into the 2nd, gaining him 21 points for the fight and an extra 5 points for beating an opponent Max Holloway has lost to. So there we have it. MMA Math predicts Ilia Topuria will beat Max Holloway, which again also matches the bookmakers' odds. I for one am extremely excited by this card. In a division that is defined by its great champions, I feel Ilia has a chance to fast track himself into that club if he gets a win over 2 of the featherweight greats. As for Whittaker versus Chimaev, look, I'm an Aussie who loves Bobby Knuckles, but Whittaker with his high-level takedown defense, mixed with his stamina and straight-line blitz, he is generally a tough fight for anyone. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm having so much fun making these videos. I'm working on some more kickboxing content to spice it up a little bit, as that is my favorite combat sport, but make sure you subscribe as I have much more content in the pipeline. Thank you again so much for watching.